So here we are, podcast number 76. Thank you for joining us, guys.
Ding, 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 ding.
So the first thing we should kick off with, the good bit of news is that the Prosthetics event 2021 is on. It's
yes,
happening
November the 13th.
in the arena. Now, it says here on the address it's Rico Arena, but it's also the Coventry Building Society Arena, previously known as the Rico Arena, and it's up in Coventry. And it's a one-day thing, but obviously people get there the day before. But the beauty of it being one day means you can realistically travel, do the thing, and then go without having to stay in the hotel. So that's cool. So the prosthetics event's happening, and we should be trying to. Well, we're going to try and do something. It's all dependent on a lot of things because it's all come around rather quickly.
Yeah. So 2019 was the last time.
Yeah, 2019.
So it's been 2 years.
Which was a good one. But yeah. So hopefully. It should all go well, but the tricky thing is having something done by then, because at the moment I'm still flat out on a movie until probably not far off of when that date starts. So I'm not quite sure that's going to work. But
I'm really excited for the next issue of Prosthetics magazine to come out because I think our latest article is a good one.
I think so. Yeah,
I think it's going to make people things that make you go
Yeah, it's about a makeup that we worked on. Where was
together.
It? March? Yeah, together, March, April time.
I think so. I'd have to look at my calendar, but it was a little bit ago. But we worked on it. It's the first time we've gotten to work. Well, actually, it's not true because you helped sculpt a Beast prosthetic for a production of Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah, but I had to fly to Colorado to do that.
Yeah, but this way we've done it transatlantically.
Yeah, which was awesome. Because I did do something, remember, at the last prosthetics event, that makeup I did with Neil Morrill. But we did a thing where I life cast Normski here. I shipped the life cast over to Toronto. And then Neil sculpted it and then posted the sculpt back. So we did everything practically, but obviously there was the time it takes for things to be posted and the risk and jeopardy involved in shipping.
And not to mention the expense.
And the expense. So this was nice to do a lot of it digitally, which was awesome. But anyway, we won't get too much into that because the magazine, we want to disclose too much about that because it's all in the article. But yeah, that was a good one. We had a really nice message sent through by Michael Mosher. How
was Michael doing?
He's doing good. It was a comment on post number 74, foam and filament, which was the one we did a couple back. And he said, Todd, if you spray a light spray of 3M glue into your negative, you'll never get steam leaks. I was having a terrible time running a mold that I'd run a million times in the past, getting those pesky collapsed pockets. And he caught Mark Vigniello for help. And this was a simple method that stopped the pockets in their tracks. It all of a sudden happened in a mold that I hadn't happened before. So there we go. And he mentions about helping with your next book. If he wants to, about
yes,
the
please.
method.
Because I guess we might as well say that now because I have gotten a green light from my publisher for a 4th edition.
Oh, that's so cool! Awesome stuff.
So
plenty work for
so
you.
Michael, yes, I would love to have a Michael Mosher presence in the book, and definitely want to have more Stuart Bray as well.
Oh, cool!
I think this is going to be a. I can't wait to get cracking on this one.
Well, the thing is, we've written a fair bit together now on the magazine article, so it should be quite nice, and the flow is there for those things. Oh, he says that his hair prep method for the ball cap, which, if you remember, is DVD. He's got a very cool way of prepping the hair.
It's a really good
trick. It seems to become an industry standard, but I was appalled to see how it was de-engineered when I worked on a commercial with 125 ball caps. I had to teach about 30 union hairdressers that there was an exact message to my madness. So thank you, Michael. That's awesome. And yeah, Todd, I guess you guys can chat and figure that out.
Yeah. His process for prepping hair is unique, to say the least, and pretty
effective.
Cool. Yeah.
one thing I just wanted to mention as well, I was going to talk. There's a couple of things we're talking about. One was I just wanted to go over COVID and filmmaking, just because
Sure.
That's it's having a direct effect on the work that we do. And this past year, I know you did something. Where did you go? Were you doing that cowboy thing?
Up to South Dakota.
South
That
Dakota.
was last summer, in June.
Okay, so it wasn't too far into the lockdowny type times, and I started. I mean, I did the first makeup stuff I'd done was earlier this year on The Witcher, and that was in January. So that's the first time I'd been sticking makeups on a bigger production. We did some stuff for The Power before, and it varied, and it was interesting to see how things were different and how things have changed over time. But I want to talk a little about COVID and filmmaking, and then we're going to talk about breaking down pieces as well. So, but with the COVID thing, one thing I just wanted to say, which was really cool, is I've been looking into, because I noticed that some of the studios I've been working at, they're building new sound stages. And that's always a good sign, because that costs money to put down bricks and mortar. But filming in the UK is going mental. They are filming like gangbusters. And apparently, in a 2018 report, real estate consultancy firm had estimated there was a requirement for up to 1.9 million square feet of new film studio space required in the UK to meet demand.
Holy cow. That's crazy.
And when you've got like Disney and stuff have got big leases, and Netflix and stuff, on various studios for years booked in already, then it's a good indication that things are set to look good. And I have to say, seeing as so many people have been burning through box sets, watching stuff because they've been on lockdown or they can't get out, a lot of subscriptions have gone on towards Prime and Hulu and all that kind of stuff. So a lot more people are streaming stuff. So there's a lot more money sloshing around in the production area of things. So it seems to be that filmmaking is one of the rare kind of industries where they've actually done quite well out of it. Because oddly, once they've found their COVID legs, it's kind of worked out well. So I just thought it was worth sort of looking over why that might be the case. I think one of the things is that productions have got the money to sort of test regularly, because I know at the moment the thing I'm on, that's like 3 times a week. So they're checking everyone in their little bubbles to make sure everyone's clear, so they can keep on top of that thing. And also, I think it suits productions quite well to be able to keep everyone with passes, so they can tap in and swipe to the various zones that they're supposed to be in. So you can have people like, for example, if you're doing makeup on an actor, then obviously you're going to be with cast, so you're at a different level of sort of scrutiny than somebody who might be lugging scaffolding around and not necessarily anywhere near performance. So
right,
do you know what I mean? So you can afford to structure things in a different way, and I think filmmaking can do that quite well.
Now, do you have dedicated COVID officers through production, or are they people who are already working in other capacities in the business but have gotten trained and certified as COVID officers to
No, you'll have
pick
like
up?
a complete COVID department, and they'll organise and liaise with people with regards to things like testing and stuff. And
Well, because what I'm asking is because I'm trained as a COVID officer, and if I'm on a production where I'm not haven't been hired, or they don't have any prosthetic work on the show, and they say, hey, can you fill in and do this? Like I've got a 3-day shoot coming up beginning of October where I'm going to be the COVID officer, and we're going to be doing rapid tests on everybody the morning of the first day and go from there.
Okay.
But I'm not doing makeup. I'm just doing COVID compliance work. I'm just being the hall monitor.
Yes. So yeah, you do have your dedicated. Each production will have its dedicated COVID officer, and then they break down into various roles under that. And you'll have dedicated testing facilities on site for each production, and you often have it at the studio, but also on location as well. I know we're filming in locations and stuff. There'll be places you go and get tested regularly and all that kind of stuff. So there's that, and obviously the things like the PPE and protocols when you're working on the actual talent as well. So you're going to be, your face is going to be near them, so you're almost always going to be wearing a mask and or visor and or goggles, whatever the production requires, all that kind of stuff. And at
Mm-hmm.
first it was like really tricky. I mean, especially the face visors when it was early on. Things here have calmed down a bit, so now we're sort of wearing more. It's the goggles so that you don't ingest stuff through your eyes, and then masks and stuff. So they have pretty good safety protocols. But you got things like studios. If you're filming in a studio or a soundstage, you have the space for things. You can blow the air around, and I'm quite impressed with how productions are kind of keeping everything safe and no more than is necessary in the room and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, depending where you're filming and what's what. But if you're testing everybody and you're keeping crew that need to be there, and those that don't, not there, and then they sort of structure meal times at different times, and
Mm-hmm.
everyone's still social distancing, doing all those kind of things. It's actually amazing how
Single serve meals, and no
everything
no
kind
more
of
big
bagged
bowls
up.
of M&Ms.
Yes, none of that. So points of contact are kind of minimised, and obviously that's what the COVID team do. That's their job, to look out for these things and think about these things, and it's working out well. So I just wanted to sort of say, from a positive point of view, how devastating COVID's been. It seems like now everyone's kind of found their COVID feet, and there are apps now where you track your test results, and they'll let you know when your next test is due and all this kind of stuff, and it's kind of streamlined everything quite nicely. But certainly with regards to the way things are filming, and I was always worried about like sticking on makeups and stuff, and how will I be able to see. And with the visors, I found it can be quite tricky with reflecting mask and stuff. So I'd wear like a darker mask so that the paleness of the mask didn't reflect. But when you're just
Mm-hmm.
wearing goggles and a mask, it's not really an issue. And then those kind of anti-fog wipes, because depending on where your mask is in relation to your goggles, if you can put the glasses slightly further forward, then when you breathe out, it doesn't steam up into your goggles. Although I've started wearing more contacts now when I do makeups, so that I don't have to wear a mask over my goggles, or do you know what I mean? Or when you exhale with a
Yeah.
mask and it goes into your glasses, it's horrible. So from a makeup application point of view, it's quite impressive how it's all working, and it hasn't really held anything up. I'm sure it's much more expensive and there's a lot more planning that has to be involved, but once that flywheel is going, production just seems to keep rolling along, and it just, like I say, with that combined with the fact that they're building more sound stages and expanding existing studio
Mm-hmm.
spaces, it's quite impressive to see that. Obviously, optimism is high for the continuing of that, so that's a nice
That's
positive
great news.
thing to say.
Yeah, well, I
So,
think everybody is going to be thrilled when all this shit goes away,
yeah.
because I don't know anybody that likes wearing masks and
No.
face shields and goggles and gloves, and it's
Well, it's a weird one. I mean, with regards to in productions, it's obviously a big deal because of the hierarchy of how you're filming things. Because if you've got scenes revolving, around a particular performer, they can't get sick. Otherwise, a lot of stuff gets messed up.
absolutely.
I guess they must have contingencies in place and all that kind of stuff. And you have like weather cover in case of weather problems. Similarly with your scenes.
Yeah.
But
It
obviously
goes in
that's-
hand in hand with their completion bonds.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
it's all got to be done.
Because shit happens.
There was a message on a forum, and it got me all excited talking about breaking down makeups. And we did a blog post about it a while ago, which I will put a link on here on the show notes of here, which was floating pieces. And there was a little downloadable workbook that went with it. But just a little bit about breaking down pieces, why you would bother break. And what do we mean? I guess we just start what do I mean by that. Like, you've got a big makeup, so you've got like an old age makeup that goes from the top of the head all the way down to halfway down the chest, and you've sculpted it all, and you've made someone look really old and cool, and you're very happy with it. The question is, well, how do you get that onto the face? Is it going to be one big piece of rubber, or are you going to turn it into 2 pieces or 50 pieces?
Yeah, one piece is going to be a real nightmare to try to apply in one piece, and virtually impossible to do with just 2 hands.
Yes.
Because it's weighty, and it's going to be floppy, and just going to create flop sweat, because it's hard to do. If you're doing it in silicone, it's going to be heavy as all get out, and if you're doing it in foam latex, it's going to shrink.
Yeah. Which, as I understand it, was the original reason why I think Dick Smith was kind of the first person to come up with that process, wasn't he? Breaking down a lot. So you sculpt it as one thing, just so you know what the finished thing will look like. So, and then now you've got that thing, and you've agreed on the look, and you now have decided, okay, this is what it's going to look like. Now you have to figure out, from a utility point of view, how are you going to separate this into practical pieces, and in what order should they go on? What overlaps what? And should the chin be part of the neck, or should the chin be part of the cheeks? Or both cheeks on one piece with the forehead? And what
and
how would you decide?
Where do you create those separating lines? Because they can't just be arbitrary.
No, and you've got to figure out where you can put it. And there's quite an art to that. So that's what we mean by breaking down pieces. Obviously, you've got a big makeup, and then you need to decide from a practical point of view how you're going to glue that on. Because, like you say, if it's in silicone, it's very heavy. Because that was the thing with foam; it shrank. So it was light to hold. You could hold it from the forehead, and the whole thing would just kind of sit there. You take that same piece in silicone, it weighs 1.5 kilos, and if you hold onto the forehead, it's going to be dragging on the floor because it's that heavy. So far from shrinking with silicone, you actually have to kind of gather to make sure you don't inadvertently stretch it, especially if it's really soft. So you may need to make them in smaller pieces for that. But the other thing I think that's nice with silicone, or indeed with foam as well, is that you can make pieces in different softnesses of silicone. So if you've got ears on top of the head, for example, they could be quite firm because they don't need to be that soft, whereas a neck piece could be really squishy. So from the same sculpt, you could allocate different pieces to be different softnesses. So that's one of the reasons why you might want to do that too, which is quite handy. But it's quite tricky to do, and I've seen a couple of college sort of makeups where people have broken things down into what I would regard as unnecessarily fussy pieces, where they'll have like 10 different molds for a makeup that could have been 3 pieces.
Right.
And it's whether or not it's worth doing and why you might do it as well. Because another thing,
separate eye bags when they could easily be part of a cheek prosthetic.
There's that, or lips, for example, or it might be practical to make the lips as a separate piece, because it might be that maybe the lips are going to get a trashing during the day, and then maybe later on you want to go in for a close-up, or there's some close-up or more close-up scenes with dialogue and stuff, and maybe if only you could remove the lips and replace them with a fresh set of lips, you wouldn't have to take the whole of the makeup off. So something like that maybe. Or you might have reusable pieces, like the big back of the head cowl pieces. Maybe, the back of the head doesn't move that much. So if you made that a reusable piece, then it would cost less to do the makeup 10 times.
Right, and you have to take into consideration those high traffic areas, like the corners of the mouth. When that goes into how the sculpting is done more than how you break it down.
Mm-hmm. Well, that comes down to sort of design of the sculpt, I suppose.
Yeah.
But normally when I've been breaking down pieces, like I say, the first thing you would do is sculpt it, and then I'm looking honestly to see what's the fewest amount of pieces I can put this into. Like as many as it needs, but no more than that, and minimize the amount of molding and casting, because obviously the more pieces you break it down into, the more work, the more time, and the more cost is involved in doing that. And also if you are breaking down certain makeups, you don't want to go all the way to finished sculpture before you break it down, because it just means you're going to have to sculpt some of that all over again. Yeah.
So you can get quite a bit of it done, but you don't want to get all of your detail taken care of in those areas where you're going to be breaking it down, where your cut lines are, because all of that's going to get trashed, and then you have to resculpt it anyway. Yeah.
I think what I'll do is in this, I will put some pictures on the show notes of this episode to kind of describe this, if this is not making a huge amount of sense. But I'll also put like I say, the link up to the Breaking Down Prosthetic Sculpts PDF, which was on that other blog post. But yeah, basically you might sculpt something, like I say, like a forehead old age makeup, and then once that's sculpted, and I tend to do this, I will only once I've finished sculpting, that's when I'll sit and think, right, how am I going to break this down? I don't feel like you should let your practical sense of how you're going to separate it and break it down later in at the sculpting stage, because I don't feel like you want to interfere with that creativity. I think you should just sculpt what you're going to sculpt, and then once you've finished it, now you have to figure out how you're going to mold it and break it down. But I think you should just go for it in the first instance, because otherwise you'll end up sort of trimming your sails a bit and sculpting things a little less ambitiously, which I don't think is the right thing to do. I think you should sculpt it, because in big shops often you know the person sculpting isn't the one molding it, so they don't care how hard this is going to be to mold, because it's not going to be their problem. so from a molding making point of view, that's why it's good training ground to have been, you know, made a lot of molds for other people, because no one's considered how easy it's going to be for me from the molding point of view, so that when I sculpt things now, I just tend to, you know, you just sculpt whatever you're going to sculpt and then work backwards from there. But one thing that I think is pretty much universal, I don't know if you've seen it done any other way, is to sculpt it first on a thin plaster. So you'd make a thin plaster core, and then paint it, usually with paint now. That happens, I think, because of that Stan Winston trick, wasn't it? The Stan Winston School for Character Arts did a video of that, where they showed how they painted the busts, the plaster bust, the same colour as the plastiline, so that there wasn't a difference between the two. That's kind of the first time I'd ever seen that done.
Yeah, I think that's more for the benefit of production and the client, so that they can get a better sense of what the finished, complete look is going to be. Where if you can see the white of the stone through the brown or the gray of whatever clay you're using, it just, there's a kind of a disconnect between the full look and seeing all of these pieces on a different colored core, and it makes sense. You know, it doesn't, the fact that you've painted it doesn't really affect the water going through the stone and reactivating the separating agent, which you have to put on the core before you start sculpting. Otherwise, you're kind of having an exercise in futility, because you've got this beautiful sculpture that you have to break down into six or seven pieces, and you soak it in the water, and why isn't it coming off?
Yeah, you're going to put that down first. So over here we have, I think the main one that people use is Scopas parting agent from Tarantes, and Neil does one. It's basically like a dental separator that dental laboratories use. What about you? Alcoat, I guess, is the main go-to.
Alcoat is good, yeah. It's, they call it a liquid foil, which started out as a dental separator in the dental industry, obviously. But you can use different things also. I use what I call soapahol, where I'll take some Palmolive dish soap and create an alcohol solution with 99% IPA, and brush a thin film of that onto the core, and the alcohol evaporates and the soap essentially dries out. And when it gets wet again, it gets slippery and slimy, and will release the clay just as well as a dental separator does.
Okay. And there was, I can't remember who it was that suggested Elmer's glue, the clear Elmer's glue.
I can see how that would work too, because that is a water-based glue that's kind of a gelatin-based glue that will dissolve in water.
So essentially it's a water-based product that you brush on. Whichever you're using, it's essentially, you paint it on with a brush, it evaporates. And the reason you do it on a plaster core is because plaster is hygroscopic, so it'll let moisture through, it's absorbent, it's porous. Even if it's painted, it's still porous, and the water will get in from the back, which is why you make the plaster thin, so it doesn't have to go through a lot of plaster to get to the behind the sculpt. And then
which makes sculpting sometimes a little bit, you have to be a little careful so you're not pushing your clay around too hard, because you don't want to push your thumb through the plaster, which would be kind of a drag. I bet you, just occurred to me, you could probably even use PVA release film. The liquid, you got to be careful that you don't use the PVA adhesive, because there's PVA adhesive and PVA release. And I use the PVA release when I'm doing epoxy molds, because it prevents the epoxy from sticking to the other epoxy in the mold. Excuse me. But when it dries, it's water soluble, and when it dries, it's a really, really thin film, just like using Alcoat.
Right.
So you could probably use the PVA as a separator as well.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that working. I haven't done it myself, but I'd like to try. It's kind of scary trying these things. I guess I should just do like a bunch of different tests. That would be a good
Yeah,
video, actually.
don't try it on a job.
No, try it on something that's not a sculpt that's got a deadline. That would be bad. If you think you can fly, try taking off from the ground first. That will be... So yeah, you normally start with a plaster core. You may paint it with a colour so it blends in with the plastiline, and then once that's dried, then you apply your release agent, either the Alco or the Alka soap or whatever it was you were using, and then you let that completely dry. So it might take you a couple of days to prepare a core and let it dry out, and then you would sculpt on top of that. If you haven't done that release agent, like you say, putting it in water, because I've seen people do that, like, well, I put it in water a week and it hasn't come off. It's like, did you put any release on first? And like, no. It's like, well, that's why you soak it, is to reactivate the release. It's not not magic. So yeah, so you need to put your release on, and then you let that dry, and then you sculpt on top of that. And what I have seen people do is to melt either the monster clay or the shelved or whatever they're using to sculpt, in a crock pot. You plug that in and it melts it, and then you paint a thin layer on, so you've got something all over that's kind of stuck, and then you can start building up your clay on top of that. Or you might roll out sheets. I don't know how you like to do this, but and then you sculpt on top of that.
Yeah, because sometimes it is difficult if you're just trying to push little firm bits of clay on and trying to get it to stick. One of two things is likely to happen. The clay's not going to stick, or you're going to peel up the release while you're trying to push the clay down.
Yeah, both of these will make you sad. So don't. I've seen people spray a little 3M over the top adhesive spray, as Michael Mosher mentioned about for steam lakes on foam. But also, I have used a very, very thin coat of Vaseline sometimes, or you can even spray it with the release.
That will work.
Because then
I haven't tried that. I haven't tried Vaseline on top of a release, but I definitely do that sometimes just onto the stone core before I put clay down, because it does definitely
finish that.
Yeah. If you got to be careful not to put too much on. It's got to be really fine.
Yeah,
that's one of the things I see beginners when they are putting release on, or putting petroleum jelly on to help the clay stick. They're just putting it on way too heavy and just kind of slides around. It's not sticking.
You want to basically get I use like a 1-inch chip brush or something, put the Vaseline in that, and then wipe almost all of it off into a paper towel, so the brush is almost dry, and then you have to wipe the brush like 5 or 6 times before you start seeing a sheen on the surface of the core, and that's how much you need. It's like tiny.
Yeah, you can even dissolve some of the petroleum jelly in some naphtha, or lighter fluid, or the odorless mineral spirit, so that you're getting a liquidy petroleum jelly, so it's easier to get that thin wash of it over the stone before you wipe it off.
And that's to help, like we say, that's to help the plastiline stick to the core. But that being a solvent-based release, it shouldn't interfere with the water-based release that's already dried. So this can sit on top of it, and it shouldn't interfere with the water soaking through later. So if you've got a full head that you're doing, it's a good idea as well to drill a hole through the top of the head, so that when you put the head and shoulders in a big bath of water to soak it later, the air can get out. Otherwise, the head has a habit of tipping, and you might damage your sculpt or something. But you'll be able to get it out more easily that way. You
got to be careful of trapping air in under either the face or the full head core, because it'll just take forever for the water to soak up into the part of the stone that is kept dry by that air pocket.
Yeah, and then once you've got your sculpt finished and it's all approved and you're happy, then now your job is to decide how you're going to break this up. And often there does seem to be, and I remember looking through, I think it was a Gorezone. I'm going to have to dig out and find out which Gorezone it was, but it was a Gorezone of the Henrietta makeup. I think it was Mark Shostrom had sculpted the body. I know it was a K&B thing though, so I don't know if he was working there. I'll have to read my article again and have a look. But I think maybe he had done, or maybe I've been careless, but I remember seeing a picture of Ted Raimi, his brother, in a spandex bodysuit in the position for life casting, and then they sculpted it. And I distinctly remember seeing a picture of the makeup having been sliced and had soaked, but they hadn't taken the pieces off, but you could see the cheek was starting to peel away around the nose. And I remember we talk about this a fair bit, where you look at these, old Gorezones and Fangorias. Gorezone,
Yeah.
I think, had the better articles. But you'd look and you'd see these little things, and you were trying to piece together what you were looking at, and there wasn't the internet to check in with. And you'd be like, what is going on? How is that? And then does the nose overlap the nose? Does the nose overlap the cheek, or the cheek overlap the nose?
Yeah, there is some logic. If you think about it, there's some logic in how you would separate pieces for a face, but you might want to alter that somewhat, depending on how you want that makeup to move when the actor moves. And how the pieces will go on, which piece goes on first, which piece overlaps what, depending on, because usually you can separate the nose fairly easy. There are obvious logical lines of how you would separate the nose from the forehead at the a cut line at the bridge of the nose and down the nasolabial line, and for making the upper lip, and just basically around the perimeter of the nose. Maybe across the temples from the corner of the eye, to separate a forehead from the cheeks, and places for the chin and so on. But depending on what things are going to happen, you might want to separate it somewhat differently if the upper lip piece extends further down, because you want how the upper. Might have to do this with pictures to show it, but you may need to alter the shape of how you're separating it, because you want, when the mouth opens, you want the upper lip to extend further down on the cheek,
the lower chin, yeah,
onto the lower chin, so that that pulls down, because that will affect what happens to the eyes, as well as the nose. So those are considerations, and that's more from a performance standpoint, that you'd probably need director input of how he or she envisions that character looking with certain facial expressions.
Yeah,
If
and
that,
also
if that
how.
makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I think it's very interesting that you mentioned the performance and the movement, because those are not insignificant factors into how makeup design should be. I think it's quite a good idea when you do the live cast. We always used to get photos of them pulling expressions and things. And if someone is of any age, there's normally enough lines on the face for you to figure out where the skin's in compress. But it's quite good also to have video footage of them pulling, or maybe even going through the performance a bit, so that you can get an idea of the kind of things that they do, because there may be certain affectations that they do or the character needs to do, like maybe licking their lips, or they maybe gnaw on their bottom lip with their tongue, or they might rub their eyes a lot, or something that you kind of go, oh, now I know you're doing that, maybe I'll not put pieces there, or I'll make sure that they're really well glued, or maybe we need to do something with your fingers, because if you've got gloved hands when you do that thing, it's going to really damage the makeup, so maybe you need to wear a silk pair of gloves underneath or something. Do you know what I mean? Things that you would like to know beforehand that will make a difference to how you prepare your pieces, and what is practical and what is impossible to
Well, it goes in
manage.
tandem with something that I tell my students frequently, is that you may have come up with the most brilliant idea and sculpted the most amazing character makeup, but when you glue it on your actor, if you haven't had a chance to do tests and so forth, if it inhibits performance in any way, even if it's psychological, then it's wrong.
Yeah, especially opera singers, they get very fussy about things.
Yeah.
Something on top of their head affecting the octave of their voice.
Yeah, and that
like
also,
you say, even if it's
that's a good
perceived.
point too. Yes, for if somebody's going to be singing in character makeup, this is something that I've had to deal with a fair amount in musical theater, for some of the character makeups I've had to do for Beauty and the Beast and Shrek and Young Frankenstein, for example, that when you're singing, the mouth is going to be opening much broader than if you're just speaking in a conversational tone. And when you glue it on and they're just talking and they're not doing the big emotions, everything might be fine. But as soon as they open their mouth broadly with that makeup glued down, ping, it pops. it's gonna pop open at the corner of the mouth every time.
It'll certainly stress those glues, and you may
Unless,
get edges lifting.
yeah, unless it's been designed to take that into account, so that it doesn't glue down that closely to the corner of the mouth, or bypasses it completely.
Yeah. And also the softness matters as well, because I think a lot of people blame the glue for things where it's like, well, the piece is too stiff, that's why the thing popped up. You know, you've got to make the piece, I think, at least as soft as the skin that it sat on, because otherwise, if it can't keep up with the skin, then, you know, at worst it will inhibit at best it'll inhibit the performance. At worst it'll actually damage the piece during use, and your edges may come up, or
Yeah,
and there's
and
nothing
on
more
film
upsetting.
you can cut camera and come in, do touch-ups and fix it. But for an actor who's on stage during a performance,
yeah.
and the
none of
makeup starts coming apart on stage, well, that's just not good.
Yeah, especially seeing
Because
as now in the
you know,
last.
they're on stage with a cheek piece that's flopping around, and there's nothing you can do about it until they're off stage, and they may only be off stage for seconds before they have to be back on stage again, and the audience is sitting out there. What all they can see now is this floppy piece of prosthetic that's not staying in place, and they're not listening to the dialogue or the songs, or
That's
paying
too
any
upsetting
attention
for
to
words.
anything. And you know, shit happens. It does happen. You know, suddenly the scene becomes about keeping a mustache on, or a nose on, and not about the scene at all.
Yeah, no, we don't want that.
And it's horrifying.
Yes, I can. I can.
Not
imagine, you
not
know,
just for the actor, but for the makeup artist, who is going to catch hell when that actor comes off stage.
Yeah, that's not good. And it won't be production that are tearing you a new one; it's the actual actor. That's the thing.
And then production.
So yeah, so you got your piece. So say you've got your sculpt then, and you finished your head's covered in rubber, and now your job is to decide. Okay, now I need to cut this up. So how would you decide where to cut? I mean, I think the rule of thumb typically is, like you say. I think you would normally cut the sculpt. There must be we need not a process. We need like a protocol for what would be done. I think typically you try and go for places where you would naturally have creases and or shadows, or like under a chin, you know, or around the jawline, places where you could hide as best as possible your seams. I mean, the intention is to make the seams good seams so you don't see them, but it still makes sense therefore to place them in places where they're not obvious. Like you wouldn't cut right through the middle of a forehead or through the middle of a cheek if you don't need to, because it's more sensible that the seam line would be behind where the wig will be, or where a beard line will be, or the corner of the nasolabial fold, or under a chin, you know. So
and any
good.
wrinkles that might happen to be crossing a cut line, you have to make sure that in the resculpt that they will line up when you glue on those finished pieces. Because if you've got a nice wrinkle line coming down a cheek that extends curves down into the chin, or down onto the neck, those lines have got to line up.
Yep. Well, we'll get to
especially
that when we do the snap marks.
especially if they're going to be visible.
Yeah, and also your textures need to line up and all that kind of stuff too. If you've you've got your sculpt, I think as well. Typically, you try and cut where the piece is thinnest as well. I think, which often is where those wrinkles and creases are, but not always. It depends how much modification you've made to the face. You know, you don't want anything unnecessarily thick, typically with pieces at all. I remember we had a good chat, Floris Schuler and I, about, you know, he had a very good point about the thicknesses of pieces and how we should have him on the show, talk more at length about this kind of stuff. But you know how it's very easy to inadvertently create pieces that are far too thick, and you don't need a lot of thickness for it to be too thick. You know, it could be a millimeter or two, and it suddenly looks way more, because when it's on the face, it kind of hangs and sags and looks like more rubber than you put on. And I've done that myself many times, so it's an interesting thing to avoid that. So you typically want to keep things thin as possible, but yeah, I think cutting where the piece is thinnest, so you're not slicing through the thickest part, is quite good. There's no hard and fast rules. It's basically what what works for the makeup, and every makeup's going to be slightly different. I don't like to be prescriptive about these things because it stops people thinking. If you just say, oh, it's going to be the cheeks and the forehead, they're separate. Because I've done makeups where I've done the nose and the forehead and the top lip as one piece, and it worked fine.
Yeah, sometimes you've got to go against convention, where if you're separating the cheeks as each cheek is a separate piece and the chin is a separate piece. You know, it's not always going to have to be separated that way, because sometimes if you're creating, you know, a bigger jaw where you need a larger, and it has to be thicker, you're going to need to keep the cheeks, chin, and possibly the neck as one piece, because they can't really be separated and resculpted without making a mess of it.
Yeah, so you may end up with a big piece, which might be a big mold, and maybe a collapsible core and all that kind of stuff. Or it might be that your makeup, you could maybe, depending on what it is, see if it's close up to camera. All of these things are going to make a difference as to how many pieces you break it down into. I think with colleges and stuff, a lot of people want to do it as an exercise, which is noble and good, and I think it's good to do. But I think it's worth splitting a makeup into 2 pieces or 3 pieces. Don't, for your first makeup, split something up into 8 pieces for shits and giggles, because I think you'll just tie yourself in knots without really getting a full grip on it. But I've done makeups where the cheeks were floated off. They were sculpted on the life cast, but actually the cheeks could be floated off and made as flat molds, which suddenly made the mold making for those 2 cheek pieces much quicker, much cheaper. And also we could churn out duplicate molds very easily. And do you know what I mean? The cheek pieces being renewable pieces, and then the only molds that we needed to make were like the forehead and nose and the chin, and because they got the curves of them, they could be on cores with molds, so they were more expensive molds. The back of the head was reusable, so we only made 1 of those, and the cheek pieces, the top lip, could be flat molded and reused.
And sometimes the forehead can even be a flat mold.
Yes, you'd be surprised what you can get away with flat molds. Now, whether or not you want to use a flat mold is largely down to your budget, and whether or not the person's going to be, are they on the poster? Are they in close-up? Or is it a case of maybe there's like, you've got like a bunch of vampires, and maybe the 3 that are closest to camera, those are the ones that cost the most money, but the people in the background, maybe they could be flat molds, or they could be, you know, you could reuse old pieces or something, or you know, maybe the seconds where the edges aren't so good, they could be used for the background people, because you're not going to see them as detailed.
But have you noticed that when you do that, when you have your background makeups and your hero makeups, you know, the ones that are
swap places.
Going to be seen. Yes, yeah, that's when I say, oh no, that we'll never see them. They're always going to be in the background. That's when you're using the flat molds, and you get, and say, oh, you know, I want these guys up front. Always happens that those background makeups always wind up being hero makeups, and say, fudge.
I got a story about that. There was a guy on, I did some stuff, there was a whole bunch of us working on Blade 2, and they had a lot of English crew come over to Prague where they were filming the Reapers. So you had your main Reapers, and then you had your background. I think there were like 3 or 4 different types, and beautiful paint jobs. I think Tom Colleen had designed the paint scheme. I think I'm right in saying that. I think so.
Well,
anyway,
we'll find out.
You'll find out. Let me know. But it was lovely, and he was the one that showed me how to paint veins, and it's a lesson that stayed with me forever since. It's been brilliant. But so you had basically the same look, but to different degrees. So the people that were closest to camera, they had pre-made, custom-made foam pieces that were pre-painted. Then there were sort of backgroundy guys that had like a chin piece and ears, and they were supposed to have shaved their head, so they didn't need a ball cap. And then I think you had further back from that, you had just paint jobs, I think. And so the guy I was doing was like a mid-range guy. So he had pieces on, but they weren't pre-painted, and he had to paint his whole head, once he was applied. Anyway, this Czech guy, he was like a dancer, and I think he did Eskrima, like, some obscure Thai martial art thing. And he was really cool looking, and he had all the moves, and I think they deliberately chose people that looked like they could move. Do you know what I mean? They were kind of slim, and they had cheekbones naturally, and they were prepared to shave their heads, and they could kind of move, what's the word? Kind of like spider-like. They're kind of skittish in how they move. So you need people that are familiar with how their body works.
Like the vampires coming out of the wall in Fright Night.
Friday Night? What, the original one?
No, the one with Colin Farrell.
All right, I haven't seen that one.
It's good.
I heard they're remaking The Lost Boys, by the way. I'm not sure how I feel about that.
What? Yeah, me neither.
I don't know. Anyway, where was it? Yeah, so this guy, so he didn't speak any English and I spoke no Czech. And basically, he was intimating to me with increasingly aggressive hand gestures that he didn't like his makeup and he wanted to look a certain way. And he basically wanted darker circles around his eyes. And I was trying to explain to him that we have to do the makeup a certain way because you're all the same creature. You have the same look. So I can't deviate from that just because. And I think basically he wanted to just have a signature look so he could spot himself in the crowd, which can happen a lot. And then he got told off, and at one point he snatched the airbrush out of my hand and started doing his own eye makeup, which was quite funny. And then we had to clean that off. And he got told off for doing that. And, he has to kind of toe the line, otherwise he's out. And then I saw him later on doing like weird jerky moves that were not what everyone else was doing, again, in order to to identify himself in a crowd. And if you've got like 50 people in a crowd all doing something unique so that they can spot themselves later, and it's it can kind of mess up the shot, especially if they don't spot it until after, you're looking at the rushes the next day and it's like, that's going to be expensive to fix. So that was quite funny. But yeah, so you have different types of makeup, different kinds of things. So it all depends on what you want. But in the worst case scenario, every piece is going to be on its custom mold and core. So it's a big job. And then obviously you've got to work out in which order your pieces are going to go on. And like you say, I think there's a logical sequence to how pieces would overlap. Like it makes sense to me for, if you were doing a separate neck and cheeks, that the cheeks would overlap the neck, not the other way around. So
right.
the edges that are hiding the neck are over the top of the neck, and if there was a shadow caused by an edge, it would be down here on the neck, not high up halfway across the cheek, for example.
Right.
Or you might, like you were saying with the lips, you might overlap pieces. So if you're going to do lip appliances, for you to get a good edge on the bottom lip may mean that in the mold on the core, you want to get rid of the top lip on the core so you can get access to the inside of the bottom lip, and vice versa. If you want a good edge on the top lip, you might need to get rid of the bottom lip. So right. I will put pictures of these things in the notes.
But it's also so because that's also when I'm doing life casts, if I know that they're going to have upper and lower lip pieces, I will tend to cast the actor with the lips slightly parted, so you have more surface area of the lip on the core to begin with. Yes,
that can be good. With silicone particularly, I found that sometimes the weight can pull the bottom lip down and you end up with the distortion. So sometimes you have to kind of put that on and then hold the lip, not up, but just stop it from sagging, because it will pull down with the weight of the stuff that's not normally on it. And you end up. But if that happens, you can always do a separate lip cast, afterwards, where you hold it in place when the life cast is off and just recast the lips. I think that's quite a good thing to do. If you're doing a nose, for example, say you've got a nose, you should get a good life cast with the nose, but maybe something happens at the life cast, you get caught out, the stuff sets, or they panic or something, so you don't end up getting a perfect nose. You could always do a separate nose after you've done the head.
So if you've got an actor who's who's somewhat claustrophobic, or has a cold, can't breathe out of either nostril, because they have forced into mouth breathing. Mm-hmm. Then you can do a separate nose and separate lips, and not worry about that. You do the face, and just you'll have to fill in that blank. But there are ways around every problem.
Yeah, and then you would cut when you do your cut as well. Often it's with a scalpel. We use a scalpel, and you'll cut at an angle. So you won't cut a straight line across. You'd follow the curves or the shapes that suit where it is, and you might hold the scalpel at an angle, so you cut it so that you cut it at an angle that's sympathetic, so that the cheek piece would go on first, and then the forehead piece might overlap it, which so you've got to kind of walk backwards and think through the makeup, and then it's quite a faff. It's no small thing to do this.
and it's not considered cheating if you make notes.
No. And take snaps. But this is why I think when you look at the PDF, you'll see exactly what I mean on there, because there's a lot of the stuff you need the pictures to see this done. I have done some videos as well where I've done this over 3 or 4 videos. They're a few years old now, but the information is still good, from a UMAE makeup I did a while back on Emma, so I'll put links to that too. I see a lot of collapsible cores happening. I think I see more collapsible cores happening in the States than I do over here.
Yeah.
And they are beautiful. If you look at some of, Rob Freitas' stuff or Carl Lyon's stuff, they're both on Instagram, and they're fantastic molds that they make. And the idea of a collapsible core is obviously that you essentially reduce or completely remove how many seams an appliance might have by putting all those on the inside, but that requires some thought and care into avoiding that. But
more brain power than I have on a regular basis.
Well, it depends, I guess, on what the job is, but I really like flaring out cores to sort of minimize or avoid doing that. I think often because of time constraints, because I can flare out a core very quickly and you don't have to think quite as hard about it. Do you know what I mean? So maybe it's just that I don't get the big budget jobs as much. But I think a lot of the times if you spend a week making a core that's collapsible to avoid a seam that could be fixed in an hour, is that a net gain or is it more trouble than it's worth? It depends on the job again, because obviously if some of the seam is going to be covered with hair, or you could make a separate appliance to cover that, or the seam is actually so good on the mold that actually, okay, it needs seaming, but it's not a whole lot of work really. It depends.
If the time and the money are there, why not go for it?
Yeah.
But if it comes down to a good, fast, cheap, pick 2.
Yeah, because you're not going to get all 3, although you'll always get squeezed for it. But I do like to see a collapsible core. And having worked with pieces with collapsible cores, the piece that comes out is beautiful and there's no seams on the outside, especially if it's in 2 or 3 pieces. That's quite amazing. But I'm just curious about that. I just thought I'd flag that up as this obsession. Some people have collapsible cores when
they're pretty.
You could avoid the seam or deal with the seam separately.
They're pretty amazing. Rob calls them puzzle molds, which some of them really are.
Yeah,
because they have to go together and come apart in a certain way. I've only used them for doing gloves.
Yes.
Doing character gloves, and for that you really need a collapsible core. Otherwise, you're in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's. What is definitely the wrong thing to do is always try and pick the path of least resistance and try and do things easily, because we've all worked for people like that where they'll always try and cut every single corner, and you end up with like the minimal viable product, which is not good for the soul, and more often than not doesn't necessarily look that great either. But I'm just saying,
the fast and cheap method.
Yeah, but you also don't want to extend yourself too far for the sake of something, because if you think about it and you could go, oh, do you know what, this is going to be under a wig, we're not going to see the seam anyway, so it kind of may or may not matter, but it does depend on the job, and I think it's a good thing to look at. But if you haven't separated your molds into separate pieces before, I don't think you want to start with a collapsible core anyway, because that's quite an extensive specialized thing. But it's worth looking into these things. And there isn't a huge amount of information on them either, which is kind of partly, I think, not because it's secretive, but just because it's so involved. The sorts of people that are doing those cores are not beginners, so they probably pride themselves on figuring stuff out anyway. One of the things I really like about Rob Freitas' stuff, he'll post really good pictures, but he won't necessarily explain everything, because he wants you to reach for it and figure it out. Because honestly, if you're going to do this for a living, it's not a bad thing to have to figure stuff out. So if you want everything spoon-fed to you, that's, it's a lot of work for him to have to break down and answer every single question. And secondly, you don't want to reduce it. So it's that treading that fine line. But I'm digressing from...
Yeah, collapsible cores are not, I would not call that a beginner's exercise.
No, but you could certainly do something like you say with fingers on hand molds and stuff.
Sure.
Where that might be useful, but often with breaking down an old age piece, I will often, I think, like you say, I like the idea of keeping the cheeks and the chin as one piece, so that if there's any continuous lines going across or weight, they can be one piece. You may or may not need a top lip or a chin. It depends. The top lip could be a separate piece, or the top lip could be part of the nose. Depending how thick it is, it might be the nose and the forehead are all one piece. There's so many variables. It all depends on the
it
makeup.
depends on the design of the makeup.
But I think one of the
that's
common
kind of going
ones,
to dictate it.
yes, I think one of the common ones though with the full head makeup is like the reusable cowl piece. So if someone's head is covered in rubber, the face area where we're going to focus most of the attention, those facial pieces could be renewed every day, but the back part of it where the ears are maybe included in it, and the top of the head and the back of the neck, that could possibly be a reusable cowl, which might not have great edges, but they are overlapped by the facial pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So the big cowl piece, which might weigh 2 kilos, that's reusable, and then the facial pieces that overlap that are softer and they're going to be around the things that are going to do the acting and the dialogue, and the eyes that are very important. They could be separate pieces. So it might be that's how you do it. So there's lots of different ways of doing it, but it's a tricky one. You kind of need to see several different makeups from start to finish compared side by side in order to get that full picture of all of those things. Because if you look at something like Darkness from Legend,
right,
that's a whole big thing with the big horns, and you've got the skull cap presumably with the mounts for the horns on it, and you might not see too many pictures of that being made, but there are plenty of pictures of like the Hellboy makeup being made and that kind of stuff. He had that scene where he had the big horns coming out and stuff. So there are pictures out there, and I think we'll probably need to do some tutorials and video tutorials on those, seeing as we've amassed quite the equipment stash for the
yes,
for the thing.
It's time to use it.
It is, and I would do more. It's just this year has not stopped. I've been at about,
which is great,
considering
you're coming in after a year of doing almost nothing.
Yeah, it was a bit chunky that year. I mean, there was a fair bit of stuff with college and stuff and Zoom things, because obviously a lot of tutors and colleges were kind of messed up with the schedules and everything, and that was all good. But yeah, it was a pretty dreadful year. But in the last year or so, it's been crazy. Hence the very, very slow release of these podcasts, because it's just been mad working sort of 12, 14-hour days in the workshop and not getting anywhere near a microphone.
It's great. I'm thrilled that you're that busy.
Yeah, it's good to be busy, but it's also the kind of thing where you want to be able to split that up over a couple of years, so you don't end up working 100-hour weeks or whatever. But where are we? So with regards to breaking your pieces down, like I say, have a look at the pictures on that thing, and if you have questions about that, by all means get in touch with us. We do love to answer some questions. There have been a lot of questions today. I was on the 911 forum on Facebook.
That's about the only thing I miss about not being on Facebook anymore.
Well, you spend a fair bit of time answering questions, and as an admin, I'm kind of turfing things out that are not supposed to be there. But I do like answering the questions and things, and also what's exciting is when someone asks a question and then you answer it, and then you suddenly realise you want to talk about it, and that's when I really miss getting to the microphone. So at lunch I might suddenly answer a message or something, or see a very interesting question. I thought, this will make a great podcast, like this one about breaking down pieces. I think it's a good discussion to have, and I know you can see some pictures of it and stuff, but it's to me, it's when I'm making something and there's a team and we're all doing different makeups and we're pointing, then there's a lot of like chin rubbing and head tilting to the angle, and everyone's nervous about making the cuts and where to put them, and there's a real agony in making the right decisions, or rather trying to avoid the wrong decisions, and you don't know until you've done it whether it's right or wrong.
Yeah.
And obviously you can cut it and then sort of smoosh it back and cut somewhere else, but you don't want to damage it unnecessarily. But there does come a point where you separate with a X-Acto knife or a scalpel and cut where you want the pieces to separate, and then you stick the whole head in water and leave it.
I think we need to. I can't remember if we've mentioned it or not in this one, but when you're resculpting the pieces on their individual snap molds, which are sections of the face that are mold casts taken from the original core and recast slightly larger so that you can resculpt and extend the piece a little bit further than it had been originally. So you've got a little bit of overlap on each piece. Because for foam latex, you need to account for the shrinkage, which is why the process was developed in the first place. But even for silicone, you want to have a little bit of an overlap, not just butting up the edge to edge, because you can't hide that seam.
No, so you want it to be like a lap join in wood.
There's got to be a slight overlap to make that blending edge invisible.
Which is why you would cut at that angle in the first place to kind of assist that, and then when the piece is down, then you, like you say, you blend out. You don't necessarily add any material. You just feather off the volume that's there up on both pieces, and then they will overlap to roughly
the volume of the two pieces will
even out.
Will even out to that the original volume.
Yeah. Now that's, as I recall, I think that's how the first time I'd ever seen that done was in the Lee Bagan book, Three Dimensional Makeup, because I think they mentioned
still one of the best books out there.
Yeah, but what I don't think they covered in that was how I would do snaps now for say you've got a very specific texture that you need to match up. What you might do is you might, for example, figure out that the chin is going to be the last piece to go on, so you might cut the chin, and then what you would then do is then once the chin is separated, you've now got an absence of a chin with a hard line where you've cut around the around the chin piece. So you've got the two cheeks that now have a slice. Even if you cut it at an angle, it's still a flat cut. So then what you might do is blend out that edge and round everything off and finish off the texture roughly with the chin of the core exposed, and then you would do what you say there. You make what's known as a snap, usually silicone or alginate of that section, including the sculpt that you finished off. So you go a couple of inches beyond the chin, so you'd incorporate maybe the bottom, the bottom of the nose, maybe some of the neck, and halfway up the cheek either side, so that you can then make a separate core of that chin with the sculpt in place. And then you may have to remold that, and then you finish off your chin now on a core that has those radiused and finished off cheeks on it. And that's another job. So that's what I'm saying. If you're doing that for the forehead and the cheek, you can suddenly find out, you might sculpt it in a couple of days, and now it's going to take you maybe 3 days for each of these pieces. So that's why it's a consideration. And if you're doing it all yourself, have you got the time to do this? And are you going to be efficient at it? I mean, I've done pieces quickly, but I've got everything I need there, and I know how to do it. If you're trying to understand and learn how to do this, and then suddenly go, oh shoot, I don't have any silicone, and it's going to take me a week to get some. Suddenly now it starts stacking up, and this is why,
this is not something you want to do first time out.
Have those things, and this is a good thing to remember from a professional working point of view, that you might get this job in, and then suddenly you've got a week to do it, and you go, well, I can do that in a week. But in order to do it, you're going to need to have some of everything there to hand, which I do. I mean, at the moment I'm working for somebody else, but I've had jobs where this has come in, and it's like that makeup that we did, that's going to be in the magazine. That we had like 10 days to turn that around, and every material I needed, I already had in stock. So that's part of why. When I quote on things, that's part of goes towards why I charge what I will charge, because I already have these materials sat there idle waiting for me to use them. Not a lot of everything, but you have enough to get going, and then that way if I need to do a live cast tomorrow, and that has happened where a friend will be like, shit, we need a live cast tomorrow, can you show up at a certain time? And I'm like, yeah, I've got everything I need to do a couple of heads right now, and that's sat there on the shelf, going off, basically. So in order for me to have a fully stocked workshop costs me money, and that's why that's going to be in your daily rate, because I have to be fully stocked all the time to some degree, so I'm ready to go. Just like if you call an ambulance, you don't want someone to have to go and buy bandages in order to show. No, fuck it, they should have that stuff ready to go, and it's exactly the same. So so there is a cost to you as the supplier to have these things on hand, but that balances out. This is the triangle we're saying, the speed thing. part of your value is that you're good to go, that you have the stuff already.
So don't forget to factor that into your quotes when you're bidding a job.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're quite lucky here because we have everything quite close to hand. I mean, I have places I could drive to if I needed to, which is good. But, it's all time. So you've got to factor those things in. So that's why I say, think about how many pieces you really need to break down into. Because if you do too many, it's going to drive you insane. But at the same time, if you don't do enough, it might be that you just can't physically put the pieces on because you can't get the brush into where you need to get the glue because you're holding onto 1.5 kilos of dead jellyfish that's flopping around your hands. You can't keep its shape. So it's a real balance between all of those things, especially if you don't, you've got to make that piece soft enough. And if it's not soft enough, it'll be too stiff, so it's easier to hold, but at the same time it doesn't move as well. So it's a sliding scale of overlapping variables and it can take a while to get your head around. So be mindful of that and try and do something small. I think it's worth sculpting something like a small makeup that maybe involves, I don't know, cheeks and a chin as one piece, and then break that down into 2 separate flat molded cheeks and a separate chin on a core. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And just kind of feel what that feels like.
It's very difficult to do a chin on a flat mold.
Yeah. I have done it. I had to break it down into 3 separate pieces, but it's easier if you can just have one piece. Again, you don't get away with it. You just transfer the panic into 3 flat molds and the fear of it not looking right until it's all on. So it all depends on what the job is. But yeah, a chin and a nose is nicer done, I think, on a separate core. But yeah, so it's quite tricky. But there we go. That's the nature of the job. It's a bit of a weird one, but I think.
Yeah. If any of this is not clear, don't hesitate to reach out to us. No, it's going to be perfect. We'll have diagrams and charts and with descriptions on the back.
But I think this is where the dialogue comes in. If you need to see certain things, then let us know, because that will then inform what we do next. Because we could do a follow-up episode of this with videos and pictures and things. Although I will put some stuff in the blog post with it. So I think that's it for that. Like I say, the Prosthetics event 2021 is good. So that's in the UK. Obviously, if you're listening to this in the future, way after this time, this is all boring historical nonsense that doesn't mean anything. But at the moment, it's only a couple of months away. It's not even.
Yeah, put
13th of
put
November
13th. November 13th on your calendar.
It's a Saturday, and it's in Coventry, and yeah, it should be awesome. I don't know when the last time I was at a trade show of any description. I think it was the 2019 prosthetics event. I think it was the last one.
And I wept because I couldn't be there.
Well, maybe things will be different this time, but it'll be a fun thing to do. And also we have a couple of things. I know there's a couple of things lined up. I can't talk about it because they're not cast iron yet, but there's a couple of things that we're certain to be doing, which will be fun. One of the tough things, I think, is going to be getting the makeups ready in time, but there are going to be people chomping at the bit who've been working away on things that just needed,
yeah, they've been working for a year, probably.
Yeah, so they just need a deadline now to wrap it up. Now, one of the things is, because we're having our roof done, we went through the loft and pulled down all the boxes. I found a box of my old Fangorias, so I'm going to be going through those, and we'll maybe have to have a talk about those, because I really want to find that Evil Dead makeup that had the Ted Raimi, the Henrietta makeup, because that was awesome. And it's just one of those makeups that I remember seeing. Like I say, I remember how I felt when I saw it, not understanding it, and I can play it back in my head now and look at that magazine. I remember looking through that magazine, and I can see it with my eyes now in my mind and go, oh, that's how they did that. And I remember the mold being in fiberglass with the black gel coat. I remember seeing that being done. And it's like, why would you mold it in fiberglass? And I didn't understand then that I do now. Oh God, do I know now? Fiberglass. Good Lord. But yeah, so it was awesome. I love Fangoria. It was such a good magazine, man.
Yeah, I've been in Fangoria.
Have you really?
Yeah.
Do you have?
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to find it now, but it might.
No,
make
it's
a cool
actually, it was before it was when they were still doing the digital edition of it, before they came back out with the new print version of it. But right. the film Decay that I designed. I can't remember what year it was, but they did a feature story on decay,
Right.
which is very cool.
It's very cool. I remember Ed Martinez. He messaged the show. He leaves us voice messages on our SpeakPipe thing, and he mentioned, because he got in touch with me to tell me about the Dead Pit. And the weird thing was, I remembered again, everything goes through my Fangoria Gorezone brain. I remember the cover of the magazine that covered the Dead Pit, but I hadn't seen the film, so I watched it recently to catch up with it. And there's the cover of the Fangoria. It kind of looks like a kind of an adult with a baby's face. It's really creepy, and it's all slimy and gooey. And I remember that magazine cover, and that's one of the magazines I managed to dig out from up in the loft. So I'm quite pleased about that. And
I have to take some pictures of those magazines.
Wow, they're just so much fun. They're just really cool, and they're full of these weird little messages and stuff. Again, this is all before the internet, so people would leave like personal ads and classified ads, and it would just, someone would write in and just like, "Ooh, Freddie and Jason forever," and that would be their message. That was it.
Well, naturally.
Fucking my brain is foggy and I'm tired, and I'm very sorry for that.
Well, it's getting late over there. It's time for a nightcap, perhaps.
It is, and when we record next weekend, I shall be better rested. But I wanted to talk to you about that breaking down things. Partly, I think, as well, to sort of see if anyone would get in touch and ask questions, because it's the way in which people don't understand something or want to see more. That's what gives us fuel to come up with other conversations, because I could talk about what I think is interesting, or you could think of something you want to talk about, but it's when people ask questions when you go, that's really good, because that's not something I thought of, or that's coming at it from an angle I hadn't considered.
We're only partly doing these podcasts because we like to hear the sound of our own voices.
Well, exactly. I love talking about prosthetic stuff, and I talk about this all the time at work, and I talk about it with people that are interested in it. And I think part of it is, for me, is to understand things myself, because I think this is what's nice about teaching it, is you really question, and other people question why you do things the way you do them, and you really thoroughly understand it, and it's pleasing to me, and it reveals your weaknesses as well. You suddenly go, shit, I don't do that. I wonder if I don't do collapsible cores as much, because actually I don't know how they're done. And then that might make you look at how stuff's done and things. And it's quite interesting to be that self-reflective at times, because it does. I learn as much as anything, especially when people write in with something.
There's a fun symbiosis between teacher and student. I found when I was in Portland for the month of July teaching, that students would ask me questions. They go, I hadn't considered that. And it makes me, I get reflective, and then, you could probably do it this way and this way and this way, and hey, let's try it and see what happens.
Yeah, and it's nice as well, if you've been teaching for a while, that you end up working alongside people that you've taught, and not necessarily that you taught them everything they know. That's not what I'm saying, but they might have just done a few weeks with you or a few days. But the point is, you were helpful in some way in their journey, and then you see them years later, and 10 years later they're doing proper jobs, or they're working on the job that you're on, and suddenly you realize the value in teaching them good stuff and not just screwing them over. I had a message from somebody talking about a course that they were on and what they didn't learn on it, and how much it cost them, and they were on it for so and so, and they didn't get to do anything except wax or whatever. And it's just like, that's so, I can't imagine, especially in the world of the internet. It's like, how do you get to screw people over like that and take their money and not give them decent education and expect that to be okay? I mean, it's just, there's the place I'm not going to mention that I did work at that seems to be still doing that to people, and it's just like, I don't know. I mean, you can make a good living by just doing things right. You don't have to screw people over. There's plenty of money to be made by just teaching good information well, charge a fair amount for it, and do a good job. You don't need to lie and cheat and move things around and pretend that you're going to run a course that you're going to close down suddenly and not give people their money back, or swap the tutors around, or whatever. You know what I mean? It seems really underhand, and it's annoying when you care about the subject, because you've been doing it long enough. You're going to see these people again, and you may even need to rely on them. And
it's a small world.
Yeah, especially this industry is very, very small. People tend to hear about the bad places, but you'll be surprised how many still get business, even though they seem to screw people over on a regular basis. So, yeah, look him up, check into things, make sure you know who the tutors are, and speak to some of the ex-students, and make sure you know where you're at.
Yeah.
Because
do some research. Don't just find one source. Find multiple sources. Or should I give them your phone number?
I'd rather you didn't. Well, we got the speak pipe. If you want to leave us a message, you can leave us a speak pipe.
Or you can reach out to us on Instagram or Stuart on Facebook.
Until the next time, dude.
All right, man. Go have a bedtime cocktail, and I will talk to you soon.
A little bourbon, maybe.
A wee bourbon.
All right, dude. See you later.
All right, man. Bye.
You can get in touch through our Facebook page or email us at stuartandtodd@gmail.com. Check the show notes for more information. If you enjoyed this episode, tell someone else and help us grow by sharing it on social media. Thanks for listening.